welcome to Rising. We have another superb show for you today. Lots of topics to cover, and we're going to get right to it. Take it away, Briahna.
Well, Robby, in the aftermath of Republicans' impeachment inquiry against President Biden, the White House has sent a memo to news outlets urging them to increase scrutiny in their coverage of the subject. The memo, titled "It's Time for the Media to Do More to Scrutinize House Republicans' Demonstrably False Claims That They're Basing the impeachment stunt on," was sent by White House spokesperson for Oversight and Investigations, Ian Sams.
Meanwhile, Democrats are coming out in full force against the inquiry. Here's Democratic House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries talking about the matter.
We have a responsibility as members of Congress to make sure that we are funding the government to provide for the health, the safety, and the economic well-being of the American people. And launching this illegitimate impeachment inquiry is certainly a distraction. Instead of focusing on doing the business of the American people, extreme MAGA Republicans are doing the bidding of their puppet master in chief, Donald Trump. When Donald Trump says jump, the extreme MAGA Republicans say how high. Leading the charge in this House Republican conference right now are extremists like Marjorie Taylor Greene and George Santos. They are driving the train right now in doing the bidding, of course, of Donald Trump. And it's unfortunate that we find ourselves in this situation.
All right. It seems like this is a tipping point for the Biden administration. Their attitude toward this Hunter Biden scandals, impeachment inquiry discourse up until this point seems to have been to ignore it. This seems like a shift that maybe reflects that there's been a tipping point. This has escalated to a point now that there's actually an impeachment inquiry. They feel like they can no longer do so.
Yeah, it can't be ignored now. I was just reading Andrew McCarthy at National Review. He's a writer for National Review. Pointing out that Speaker McCarthy did not hold a vote on this. He just declared it. Republicans control the chamber on paper, ostensibly, very, very tight margin. If this is something all Republicans are so on board with, why would you break the norm of having a vote to launch the impeachment inquiry? Probably it's because there would be some Republicans who would defect from this, Republicans who are in districts that are more swing districts, who are threatened by seeming to cater to the further right direction. So he's just declared it. I mean, he's in a very tough spot, which, none of that is to say, again, that there's nothing to investigate. I do think there's plenty to investigate, but Republicans are really in danger of putting the cart before the horse in the same way Democrats and the mainstream media have so many times in their investigations.
Yeah, I think we're going to get a little bit more into the implications for what the Republicans are up to in a second. But before we do that, what do you make of Hakeem Jeffries' approach there? Who do you think he's talking to? And is he persuasive to anybody in the voter pool and the electorate that he needs to persuade that this is not that big a deal?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's a persuasive pitch to Republican and Republican-leaning voters, but, there are it's tough to imagine, but we know there are voters out there whose minds are not made up between Biden or some other Democrat and Trump or some other Republican who have gone back and forth, who are thinking a lot about what the economic situation is going to be, maybe, which side is going to go too extreme in some way that, deviates from just a kind of desire for normality that many independent voters tend to have. So maybe he's speaking to them and hoping that this portrays Republicans as, too vengeful to be trusted with power again. Of course, at the same time, Democrats are doing absolutely everything they can to imprison Donald Trump. You can think that's justified, but maybe this just looks like, maybe to an outsider person, a person who doesn't follow politics every day, this just looks like, well, Republicans are doing what Democrats are doing.
Yeah, I do think that the generalized idea, I think we talked about this a little bit yesterday, that we could be getting to the business of governing instead of doing, political circus, is a good one, except for that at a certain point, you need to be specific about what it is you would be doing in lieu of addressing this impeachment inquiry mishigas. Just standing there and saying, "Oh, I'm going to be doing really good stuff if you drop this impeachment inquiry," isn't credible if the entire pitch that the Democrats have been making for the last 3 years is, sorry, we didn't fulfill our campaign promises. We couldn't do anything because of Manchin and Sinema, because of Republicans, because. I'm listening to Hakeem Jeffries talk, and I don't know that I necessarily believe that there's going to be much done instead. Now, every time he gets up on a podium and grandstands like that, that is an opportunity for him to make a substantive case for what the Democratic Party can deliver. The question is there a case to be made?
Here's a concern I have. Are we getting to the point where just the U.S. president, no matter who he is, no matter which party he's in, no matter what he's done or how he's governed, he or she will face an impeachment inquiry and maybe an impeachment vote at some point? Look, George W. Bush and Barack Obama both did a lot of things that I think were unconstitutional, that were wrong and evil when it came to foreign policy. They were not impeached for it. They were not. I think there was maybe some talk of like an impeachment inquiry into George W. Bush that like never went anywhere among like Cynthia McKinney type people or something. There was no serious effort to hold either of those presidents accountable for what was seen by at least some people as egregious wrongdoing. Mm-hmm. Are we getting to a norm? Are those days over where now the president will be impeached no matter what?
Well, I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing if they're being impeached for substantive failings. For all of the frustration and I'm trying not to say bloviating, but I do think a lot of it is in bad faith. But of all of the discussion, shall we say, about the war in Ukraine and how improper it is for Joe Biden to have gotten us into a proxy war, the Republicans have not chosen to try to ding him on that in particular. I don't know if there's grounds or substance. There's obviously not a ton of ground or substance for the Hunter Biden thing at this point as well either. But I think they would have a lot more credibility if they did pursue impeachments on the basis of bad political actions that presidents took that are contrary to the interests of the American public, and not just their kind of allegations of personal corruptions and failing. I'm not saying those things aren't important, but a world where everyone's getting impeached, I'd much prefer it to be a world where everyone's getting impeached for the substantive things they've done in office.
Yeah, for unconstitutional policies.
Yeah. Well, meanwhile, Politico's Kyle Cheney, along with Josh Gershon, reported, quote, the Biden administration has a literal trump card to play against the House GOP impeachment inquiry. In 2020, Trump's DOJ issued a binding legal opinion that impeachment inquiries are invalid without an official vote of the House.
That's what I was getting into just a minute ago. The GOP House Oversight Committee announced yesterday on X, that's Twitter, that Chairman James Comer is requesting Secretary of State Antony Blinken to provide information on then Vice President Biden's, quote, sudden shift on Ukraine policy. They say that in 2018, Joe Biden publicly boasted about his role in having Ukrainian prosecutor Viktor Shokin fired, and by his own admission, Biden said he made the removal of the prosecutor, General Shokin, the man leading the investigation into Burisma, a condition for Ukraine to receive a critical $1 billion loan guarantee. Right, this is the element of this that I think is most suspicious and potentially indicative of some criminal wrongdoing. Yes, whatever information Blinken might have or anyone else should be turned over and made available. Look, this can't just be ignored, again, because Biden, or not Biden, Trump was impeached over this. It was made into a national political issue. You can't say, well, who really cares? A prosecutor in Ukraine, we're going to impeach the president over that. We did that. We absolutely did that.
To that end, because
that was a choice.
Very issue was
that one was a choice.
An impeachment inquiry already. The one thing that I do think I'm hung up on is the idea that we had 4 years of Trump and a Trump DOJ. This particular issue was something that Democrats ultimately impeached Trump over, and that there is somehow going to be a treasure trove of damning information that is going to be unpacked as a consequence of this impeachment inquiry.
You don't think there's any chance that Trump's DOJ was, like his foreign policy advisors, like his generals, like everyone else, were people who didn't like him and didn't share his vision and were not going to actually work to help him?
And also liked Joe Biden?
I mean, I don't want to sound conspiratorial about it.
I mean, there are.
Trump is a norms breaker, a rules breaker.
But that's fine if Trump is going against the blob with respect to foreign policy, and his team has personal articulated allegiances to the blob, then that makes sense for them to want to go against Donald Trump in that instance. But the argument here is what? That his team is secretly sympathetic to Joe Biden and doesn't want to follow Trump's instructions on finding out if there was any wrongdoing from Hunter Biden?
I'm not trying one of those people who say Trump never fails, he can only be failed, because it was ultimately his failure to appoint and choose people over and over again who did not share his policies. Who he thought, again, John Bolton, he thought he looked good on TV. He was a really combative personality, and he chose him for that.
John Bolton secretly loves Joe Biden? Like
John Bolton doesn't secretly love Joe Biden. He openly loves Joe Biden.
Openly love Joe Biden. There's a difference between having an objection to Donald Trump as someone who has bucked establishment thinking on the Republican Party and choosing as a moment when you want to go against Donald Trump, an action that would express sympathy not just for Joe Biden, but for the other team, for the Democratic Party, doing favors for the Democratic Party. That is
they all secretly hate him. Sometimes not so secretly.
So that's one way to think about it. So we'll see if this impeachment inquiry yields dividends. Meanwhile, over at CNN, it seems hell hath frozen over. Here comes some actual fact-checking of Joe Biden.
This president has a pattern at this point of either inventing or embellishing stories about his own past, his biography. He did it 3 times in one speech last month alone. He claimed he had witnessed a bridge collapse in Pittsburgh when he actually showed up about 6 hours later. He claimed that his grandfather had died just days before he was born himself at the same hospital. In fact, his grandpa died more than a year before in a different state, not the same hospital. And he also repeated a favorite false story that I and others have debunked over and over again about a supposed conversation with an Amtrak train conductor he was friends with, who was actually deceased at the time the conversation would have had to take place. And that's not all. There are some more serious ones in my view. Previously in his presidency, he claimed at one point he'd been arrested during a civil rights protest when, in other versions of the story, he just said an officer had taken him home from a protest. He said he had visited the Pittsburgh synagogue where worshipers were killed in a 2018 mass shooting. In fact, he had actually spoken to the rabbi, but never went.
Yeah, there's 2 options here. Either he is a serial fabulist and intentionally lying about things to inflate his own place in history and his own integrity and his own courage, or he has such bad memory and recall that he accidentally lies a lot. And I'm not sure either of those is particularly assuring.
Or both. I mean, to be fair to him, he exaggerated. He had a history of exaggerating things well before there were serious concerns about his mental fitness and being all there. Obviously, his first entrance into the national spotlight was when he ran for president and plagiarized a speech from a British politician back in either the 92 election or the 88 election, I'm not sure. So this is, a person like other political figures, like Hillary Clinton, like Donald Trump, like all of them who, routinely and ritualistically exaggerate their heroism, their proximity to battle sites and disasters and explosions. When he's been, as you always point out, he hasn't even visited some of the actual disaster sites we've had recently. East Palestine, the Maui visit, he went there, but it didn't go well. So maybe instead of exaggerating all the places he wasn't there for the thing, but you can go there later to comfort the people and do your job. But some people are frustrated with how little he's done of that. More Rising right after this.